I'm not going to start with my own voice on this. I was doing some research, and this is the best description I found of your company. I quote, "A bunch of brilliant nerds are legally making money distributing content they don't own on the internet." So, with that, how does Aereo work?
So should I be proud of the nerd part or the brilliant part?
Let's stick with the brilliant part.
You know, it's an interesting question and description because we actually don't distribute anything. The whole point of Aereo has been that consumers can, you know, go get an antenna themselves. We just figured out a smaller, smarter, simpler, what I'll say, a more modern version of it, and built a whole lot of technology around it.
Right, so let's back that up a second. So the idea is, like, if I want to watch TV, I don't have to pay anybody to do that. I can go out and buy some bunny ears, right?
You already have paid. It's called the Congressional Spectrum Grant that started in the 1930s and 40s, which is, you know, probably some estimates are $40 to $60 billion. So the consumers have already paid for that license, and you can go get a bunch of bunny ears or over-the-top antenna, and you can watch TV.
And so when I first learned about you, the thing that intrigued me the most, Chet, was that somewhere in Brooklyn, the borough in which I then lived, there was a warehouse with a bunch of bunny ears that you all had put there.
That's
so,
right.
So explain to us then how the service works. What, as a customer, am I paying for when I pay for your service?
So you're paying for the technology that you license from us. So think of it as a SaaS application for direct-to-consumers.
Right.
And you get storage, DVR, streaming capabilities, applications, antennas, et cetera, all that packaged in for a very low price. But the whole idea is you're paying for technology, and that's actually the thesis behind Aereo, is that the future of this business, media industry in general, will allow for a decoupling of traditional distributors' technology to just consumer-grade technology that consumers can buy anytime, with sort of an open marketplace on top that people can buy and sell content and package it and do all kinds of interesting things with.
And so how does the business model work? As in, how much are consumers paying for the service right now?
So consumers pay either $8 or $12, depending on the plan they take. We average about $10. And you know, it's online. You don't have to buy a box, equipment, or any of those things. And you know, our costs are reasonably low. We create all the technology ourselves. We manufacture things ourselves. It's a really great team. So we hope we'll make a bunch of money doing it.
So you have a bunch of money. You have a very big backer in Barry Diller.
Yes.
And that's been very necessary because you also have a slew of, shall we call them, enemies. Or at least perhaps sometimes they term themselves enemies. You've been the subject of a number of lawsuits, and in fact, recently you had a big victory, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think of any of these companies as enemies because I think, you know, the industry is changing and evolving, and incumbents, they have large, great businesses, and frankly, they were great businesses well before we came along, and they have every interest to figure out how they're going to morph and change this interest, and that may include certain, you know, approaches that they take towards us, help us, against us, whatever that happens to be. So I don't really think of them as enemies. And
that said, you had not actually launched before you were sued, right?
We had announced our intention to be launched. Yes, that's right.
So that was in the New York market. That was just over a year ago. And maybe you can just tell our audience what happened once you announced your intention to launch.
So we announced our intention to launch somewhere around, I think February, what's Valentine's? February 14th.
February 14th. That's a good day to remember, by the way.
Yeah. So we announced then, and I think we were sued in the New York market somewhere around March timeframe, well before we had actually launched anything. And we actually, as a result of that, we just ran our beta through fall at that point till we won our sort of first major victory in the court. And since then, we've been slowly growing out the subscriber base in New York. And then recently have started expanding to, we announced 22 additional cities that we wanted to get done in the first half of the year.
So right now your service exists in Boston,
Atlanta,
in addition to New York City, Boston,
Atlanta,
and today, big news.
We announced Salt Lake City, we've announced Chicago, and there'll be, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, about 13 or 14 more that we will layer in. And now the cadence is going to be every week or 2 weeks, there'll be 2 or 3 or 4 cities, depending on the pace that we get the work done.
And I want to get to the future strategy in a minute, but I want to go back to just the timeline and the history of the lawsuits. So you were back in 2012, February 2012. You were sued by basically all the big networks in the New York market.
17 plaintiffs, 17 or 18, I forget.
17 or 18. That must make media cocktail parties a little awkward in New York.
Fortunately, I was never one for going to them, so and they don't invite me. They never did, so it's okay.
So that works. Essentially, the court found in your favor.
Yes, the trial court had a trial, effectively
Sure.
a mini trial. I got to wear a tie and go testify, and expert witnesses and everything else, because there was a lot of debate. You know, how could you do it with a small antenna when it historically has been this large?
Right.
And there was lots of experts, and people agreed that yes, of course, it's possible. And in fact, the technology, and the judge found that the technology worked exactly as we advertised. And if it did, then it was legal. And
Right.
so that was a big decision. Now, it was a preliminary stage of the trial, which was appealed in the appellate court. I think we had a hearing at the end of 2012,
Sure.
which we heard the decision in April of 2013, which was, again, a really, really solid opinion from our perspective that really clarified the basis in law, the basis in congressional intent, policy arguments for it, and how the technology worked.
Right.
And which was then again appealed. It was sort of like a do-over over do-over that was requested. And about a week ago, the appellate court denied that they would not allow that do-over.
For the New York market.
For the Second Circuit.
For the Second Circuit. Because then also it sort of came back, was it NBC that sued you in the Boston market?
No, Hearst Media,
Hearst
which
Media.
owns one of the affiliates
Okay.
for CBS, I think. I'm not certain, but yeah.
So it seems from all of these lawsuits like you have the potential to be really disruptive. But I wonder, and I often hear asked, what do you know about whether consumers want this service? Are they willing to pay for it? Are you getting users?
So lots of questions in there.
Indeed, it's my job.
Do consumers want the service? Absolutely. And mainly because we see the user behavior. And by the way, the basis of this company was when I was running my last company, I noticed something very interesting, which was about 25% of the people essentially watch network television, and they had digital cable. Almost 80% of the households watched 7 or 8 channels. Now, they weren't all 7 or 8 channels the same channels, but they were on the top 10 channels on the dial. But then on the negative side, if you take out ESPN and HBO, the pie gets relatively small. And in addition, now you've seen all the migration of content. People don't watch channels anymore, right? They watch shows.
Right.
All that content is making into online libraries. So unless you really are a diehard ESPN fan, there's lots of ways to skin this cat at a fraction of the price. And then you compare that to the emerging trend. Median cable subscription age has gone up 10 years since 2000. So all that information comes into in somebody like us and said, well, there's a meaningful opportunity here. Now, obviously, these are very early days, and we have to sort of build a business and get things right.
So what do you know about how many users you have? Are you willing to tell us?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so what do you know about how many users?
Well,
other
I think
people
the last publicly reported number was 2,000 users. So I'll stick to that. How's that?
Okay, 2,000 users. If that were most likely the number, I don't think you would be on this stage right now. Just
Fair
saying.
enough.
So I'm curious, what percentage of the market are you going for here? I mean, what's success for you?
We think the starting point for us, we think we can get to a 25% penetration.
25% penetration.
On a population basis.
Okay.
And we think that number, it's a long, hard road for us because it's a fair bit of technology. It's not, unfortunately, just a website that we set up, right? It's almost like a cellular company. We go city by city, we set up infrastructure. It's a lot of capital that we have to deploy.
Right.
All for a grand purpose of basically creating this platform, this marketplace where the future entertainment options will become available.
Right.
So we think that window is probably a 5-year window for us, maybe 7-year window. I don't know the number.
So just so I understand, so within 5 to 7 years, you hope to be at a place where 1 in 4 people in this room will be subscribers.
In one way, shape, or form.
So it sounds a little
Whether
bit
or
like
not they take cable.
like a Netflix model.
Well, I think Netflix I think is an incredible company. I mean, they've had like all businesses have had their challenge. But again, let's not forget where the starting point was, which was mailing DVDs, right? No different than renting antennas in some way, shape. It's
Right.
very similar copyright argument to some extent. And once you get a user base, then you can really explore what options. Now, we're not a content company. We think of us as our chosen place in life is to create technological value for other content creators that might want to use
Right.
this technology in the future.
Right.
But again, these are early days. Who knows? I may be fired in 2 years. It's been known to happen. Founders usually get fired.
That never happens. I don't
And
know what you're talking
who knows
about.
after that? It may be a completely different company.
So I'm holding in my hand here the bunny ears, modern day bunny ears. You're going to have to really squint to see these. And while you're squinting, I also want to turn to you, the audience, for some questions for Chet. Do we have any warm-up questions in the house? All right. Where are we at? Oh, back there with Adam. I want you to model for everybody how you say your name and your organization before you ask the question.
Question from someone else.
Hey,
Oh.
Chet. Hi, Jesse.
Hey, how are you doing?
Xander Lurie, formerly of CBS.
Hi, Xander.
Chet, put aside the legality question the courts are answering. When you think about the broadcast networks and the retrans growth that's helped their businesses, and the spectrum trade, which enables them to go kind of cover news in Afghanistan and pretty unprofitable places around the world, why won't they just take their good shows and sell them to cable networks? It seems there's kind of a discrimination here against broadcast networks who are spending $3, $4, $5 million on dramas, but also $1 billion a year on football. So won't the ecosystem just respond to all the households who pull off cable? Can you talk a bit about what's going to happen to the ecosystem?
Well, clearly they're their own businesses, so they can choose to do whatever they wish to do. My belief is that I think the audience scale that broadcast represents, the localism, the tie-in with the affiliates, the strength, and frankly the statutory power that Congress gives them along with that position in the dial has certain implications. And I think that's the equivalent of saying, well, you shouldn't be able to use an antenna. And this is sort of the confusion, I think, in people's minds is Aereo's technology isn't applied towards a cable channel, for instance, right? It's purely applied towards free-to-air broadcast, and irrespective of the size, shape, location of the antenna, the idea that a consumer can have an antenna has been true from time immemorial. Now, we went through a lot of exercise to design things to comply, and frankly, it's sort of hilarious in the press, right, where people say, well, you know, they've designed the technology solely so that they can do this. Well, what's wrong with that? The whole point is to comply with the law. So my belief is I don't think that argument sustains itself just because the regulatory power, statutory power, the audience access, and frankly, if you start looking at the business landscape that's evolving as well, right? Not to point fingers here, but the reality of what's happening in New York is a good precursor to the incredibly competitive dynamic of this marketplace that I think cries out for alternatives that need to exist.
So, okay, we'll go right back there. And I'm squinting to see you, so give me your name when you ask your question. A mic is coming your way. Mike. We're going to go first to here and first to you and second to you.
Hi, I'm Mark Johnson. I'm CEO of Zeit. And full disclosure, we're now owned by CNN, which is owned by Turner, which is owned by Time Warner. But one thing I learned when...
Not a plaintiff in our situation, so that's totally okay.
Excellent.
Although they do think on record that we're inconsequential, so that's okay too.
So about 2 weeks after
I'm
Zeit
applying
launched,
for the next, we'll stay after Albania in the army situation. But
No comment. About 2 weeks after we launched, we got a cease and desist from 8 or 9 major media companies, which kind of shocked us. And one of the things that it taught me was, A, that it's really good to disrupt media because media needs a lot of disruption right now. But the second thing it taught me was that it's really important to play nice with the content providers. So after that nasty gram we got from the lawyers, it amazes me still that the general counsels were able to agree on language in just 2 weeks. We talked to the business people and started to figure out how to play nice with media companies. And we've done a really good job of that over the next 2 years, consequently being acquired. So I just wonder, what are your thoughts on that about, how do you play nice in this industry?
So playing nice.
We didn't get a cease and desist. We might have thought about it, but we didn't get one. I think look, at the end of the day, I think once you let the noise factor die down a little bit, right? I think a technology company that's creating incredibly low cost, highly valuable technologies is interesting to a lot of people. And I think that applies towards advertising, that applies towards consumer experiences, that applies towards, and I really do take a step back and I say, look, neutral tech companies are a lot more interesting to the media business and should be than large balance sheets that finance that tech, because the large balance sheet comes with an agenda of some way, shape, or form of essentially control. So I do think that idea will resonate at some point. Just to be clear, right? We didn't sue anybody. We actually went around and showed people what we were doing. So that's still our shtick. It's like we're happy to work with whoever wants to. We're happy to license people technology, show them what we're doing, and all of those things. But I think the industry has sort of a way of, annealing, and I think it takes a little while. It was just kind of. And by the way, all full disclosure, it's not like I'm some sage in this industry, right? I'm a pretty small company, and so we'll see how things develop. I have always had a faith that I think media companies need interesting, neutral technology companies that can create a relationship, and I think it takes a while for those things to develop.
Right back here.
Yeah, thank you. Mark Anderson, Strategic News Service. I am a huge fan, by the way.
Thank you.
And we just did a deep dive into TV and the future of TV, and your company and your name was right in the front. So I'm really pleased to have you here on stage. I watched your C-SPAN interview.
This is for witness protection program that I'm growing now.
So I saw the C-SPAN interview yesterday. It's an hour-long C-SPAN. You did a really great job, I thought. And
Thank you.
But it raised one question in my mind. This is probably a legalistic thing, but it's very important. Totally agree that we own the airwaves. We gave them to those guys, and you're doing the right thing. But I noticed that on your website you say, you'll only, if I'm a subscriber, I have to be in Boston to get the local. And when I drive out of that range, then I lose the ability to get that programming. I assume there's a legal reason for that. So my question is, will it always be like that in your business model? And how do you cover? Do you just only cover certain NFL cities then, or how do you actually do this?
Well, the ambition, so to answer the second question, the ambition is to build out 50, 70 cities as much as we possibly can, and potentially even open up the technology from a partnership perspective, relationships. I fully don't know kind of where we're going to end up, but you can almost draw the line out and think of it as a utility at some point, or an antenna utility that's available.